The warm California sun cast long shadows across the peaceful streets of Pine Valley, where the Martinez family's modest two-story home stood as a testament to the American dream. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But on this seemingly ordinary Tuesday afternoon, no one could have predicted that the tranquil neighborhood would become the starting point of a father's desperate mission to save his daughter from one of Mexico's most ruthless cartels. For retired Marine Master Sergeant David Martinez, the skills he had hoped to leave behind in combat were about to become his daughter's only hope for survival. Inside the brightly lit kitchen of the Martinez home, 8-year-old Sofia hummed quietly to herself as she worked on her art project, her small hands carefully arranging colorful pieces of paper into a collage. Her dark curls fell across her face as she concentrated, occasionally brushing them away with paint-stained fingers. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, creating patterns on the wooden floor that she found fascinating. Sofia was the kind of child who noticed these small details, who found wonder in the simplest things, a trait that reminded David so much of her mother. David Martinez sat in his home office upstairs, surrounded by family photos and memories of his 20 years in the Marine Corps. His service had taken him to the darkest corners of the world, but he had left that life behind 3 years ago, choosing instead to focus on being present for Sofia after losing her mother to cancer. The transition hadn't been easy, but Sofia's smile made everything worthwhile. He glanced at the Purple Heart mounted on his wall, a reminder of the sacrifice and pain he had endured in his final deployment. The medal served as a constant reminder of why he had chosen to retire. His family needed him more than his country did. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the distant sound of children playing and the occasional car passing by. It was the kind of peace David had fought to protect, the kind of normal life he had dreamed of giving his daughter. But unknown to the Martinez family, that peace was about to be shattered. Just outside Pine Valley, in an abandoned warehouse, near the industrial district, members of the notorious Los Sombras cartel were finalizing their plans. Miguel Ramirez, the cartel's local commander, stood over a table scattered with surveillance photos and maps. His scarred face twisted into a cruel smile as he examined a recent photo of Sofia leaving her elementary school. The cartel had spent weeks watching the Martinez family, learning their routines, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. To Miguel, Sofia was merely collateral, a means to an end in their larger operation to control drug distribution routes through Southern California. "The girl is the key," Miguel explained to his men, his finger tapping against Sofia's photo. "Her father's property sits on the perfect location for our new smuggling route. Once we have her, he'll have no choice but to cooperate." What Miguel didn't know, what none of them knew, was that they weren't just targeting any retired Marine. They were about to awaken a father's worst nightmare, and in doing so, unleash a force they couldn't possibly understand. The sun continued its descent, casting an orange glow across Pine Valley as David checked his security cameras one last time, a habit he had never quite shaken from his military days. Everything looked normal. The street was quiet, the neighbors were going about their evening routines, and Sofia was still working on her art project downstairs. He smiled, thinking about how passionate she was about her creative pursuits. But in the warehouse, Miguel's men were gearing up. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking weapons and donning tactical gear. These weren't street thugs. They were trained killers who had carried out dozens of similar operations. "Remember," Miguel instructed, his voice cold and calculated, "we need the girl alive and unharmed. Her father will be more cooperative that way." Back at the Martinez home, Sofia had just finished her artwork, proudly holding it up to the kitchen window to see how the sunlight played across its surface. "Daddy!" she called out, her voice filled with excitement. "Come look what I made!" David smiled, pushing back from his desk. These were the moments he lived for now. These simple, precious instances of fatherhood that meant more to him than any medal or commendation. But as David stood up, his trained eyes caught movement on one of his security monitors, a dark van slowly cruising past their house for the third time in the past hour. Something about it set off warning bells in his mind, triggering instincts he hadn't needed to use in years. He zoomed in on the vehicle, his heart rate quickening as he noticed the tinted windows and the lack of license plates. The peace of Pine Valley was about to be shattered, and David Martinez was about to be reminded that some skills never fade. They just wait, dormant, until the moment they're needed most. The warehouse buzzed with activity as Miguel Ramirez's men made their final preparations. The cartel commander stood by the loading bay, watching as his team performed last-minute weapons checks. These weren't ordinary foot soldiers. They were Los Sombras' elite enforcement unit, hand-picked for their ruthlessness and efficiency. Each man had proven himself through blood and violence, earning their place in this specialized team. "Listen carefully," Miguel addressed his men, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through years of brutal operations. "The Martinez property is crucial to our expansion. Their land connects directly to our planned distribution route, making it the perfect staging ground for our operations in Southern California. But the old Marine refuses to sell." He paused, letting his words sink in. That's where his daughter comes in. Ramon, Miguel's second-in-command, stepped forward with a laptop, displaying detailed surveillance photos of the Martinez home. "We've monitored their routines for 3 weeks, Ramon explained, his fingers tracing paths on the screen. "The girl spends most of her time in the kitchen or living room. Security cameras cover the perimeter, but there's a blind spot near the side entrance. The father works from his upstairs office, but checks on her regularly." Miguel nodded, studying the images. The father's military background makes him cautious, but his weakness is obvious. He'd do anything to protect his daughter. He turned to face his team, his scarred face illuminated by the warehouse's harsh fluorescent lights. "Once we have Sofia, David Martinez will have no choice but to cooperate. He'll sign over his property, and Los Sombras will have its smuggling, a route." The men listened intently as Miguel laid out the plan. 2 teams would approach from different directions, one to create a diversion at the front of the house, while the other would exploit the security system's blind spot. They had timed it perfectly, knowing David's routine of checking the property at sunset would leave Sofia momentarily alone in the kitchen. "Remember," Miguel emphasized, his tone growing darker, "we need the girl unharmed. A frightened child is leverage. A hurt child becomes a father's reason for revenge." He spoke from experience, having seen what motivated men could do when pushed too far. "Once we have her, we move immediately to the secondary location. Martinez will receive his instructions within the hour." As his men dispersed to their positions, Miguel pulled Ramon aside. "What else have you learned about the father?" Ramon opened another file on his laptop, displaying David Martinez's military record, or at least the parts they had managed to access. 20 years in the Marines, Master Sergeant. Multiple combat deployments, specialized training in urban warfare, and counter-terrorism. Purple Heart recipient during his final tour in Syria. Miguel's expression remained unchanged, but a flicker of concern crossed his eyes. "And after retirement?" Ramon shook his head. "Lives quietly, works as a security consultant from home. Seems focused on raising his daughter since his wife's death. Nothing to suggest he maintains military connections." "Let's hope it stays that way," Miguel muttered, checking his watch. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the warehouse windows. "Move out! I want this done cleanly and quickly." The men began filing out to their vehicles, 3 unmarked vans that would approach the Martinez home from different directions to avoid drawing attention. In the corner of the warehouse, Vicente, the youngest member of the team, was checking his gear one final time. Unlike the others, he seemed unsure, his movements hesitant. Ramon noticed and approached him. "Having doubts, boy?" Vicente looked up, trying to mask his uncertainty. "The girl. She's so young. Are we sure this is necessary?" Ramon's face hardened. "This isn't about the girl. This is about business. Los Hombres doesn't ask questions. We follow orders. Remember that if you want to survive in this organization." Miguel overheard the exchange and walked over, placing a heavy hand on Vicente's shoulder. "The girl will be returned to her. Father, once we have what we need, no one needs to get hurt today." His words were meant to be reassuring, but they carried an underlying threat. Vicente nodded, understanding both the spoken and unspoken message. As the team departed, Miguel remained behind, establishing his command center in the warehouse. Multiple screens displayed live feeds from cameras his men had secretly installed around the Martinez neighborhood over the past weeks. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. He watched as his teams got into position, each van taking a different route to avoid detection. "Soon," Miguel muttered to himself, his fingers drumming against the metal desk. "Soon David Martinez will learn that even retired Marines must bow to the will of Los Sombras." What Miguel didn't realize was that he was about to learn a very different lesson. One about the lengths a father would go to protect his child, and the dangerous mistake of underestimating a Marine who had nothing left to lose. The late afternoon sun cast golden streaks across the kitchen floor as Sofia put the finishing touches on her art project. She had recreated a scene from her favorite story, a brave knight protecting a castle, using bits of colored paper and glitter. To her it was a masterpiece, though glue and sparkles now covered most of the kitchen table. David would usually remind her about being messy, but today he was distracted by something outside, checking his security monitors more frequently than usual. Sofia had just finished cleaning her workspace when she heard a firm knock at the front. "Udor." She hesitated, remembering her father's strict rules about never opening the door without him present. Another knock came, more insistent this time. "Hello," a voice called out. "Package delivery." Sofia stood frozen in the kitchen, her small hands gripping the edge of the table. Something felt wrong, though her 8-year-old mind couldn't quite explain why. "Daddy!" She called up the stairs, her voice wavering slightly, but David was in his office, headphones on, reviewing security footage of the suspicious van he'd spotted earlier. He didn't hear his daughter's call, didn't hear the sound that followed, the sharp crack of the side door being forced open. Sofia's eyes widened as she heard footsteps coming from the direction of the garage. Before she could scream, 3 men in dark clothing entered the kitchen. The leader, a tall man with a jagged scar across his left cheek, moved swiftly toward her. "Hello, pequeña," he said, his voice attempting to sound gentle but failing to mask its menacing undertone. Sofia backed away, her heart pounding. She opened her mouth to scream, but another man quickly pressed his hand over her lips, muffling any sound she might make. "Quiet now," the scarred man whispered, crouching down to her level. "We're going to take a little trip, and you're going to be very, very quiet. Understand?" Sofia's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, too terrified to do anything else. The third man kept watch at the kitchen entrance, his hand resting on the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. Upstairs, David finally noticed movement on one of his security cameras, figures moving through his blind spot, exactly where he'd been meaning to install additional coverage. His military training kicked in instantly, and he reached for the gun safe hidden behind his desk. But before he could enter the combination, he heard it, the sound that would haunt his nightmares. Sofia's muffled whimper, followed by the quiet shuffle of multiple sets of feet. David's heart nearly stopped. With practiced silence, he moved to his office door, years of combat experience guiding his movements. He could hear them downstairs, their whispered Spanish carrying clearly through the quiet house. His mind raced, calculating angles, exits, and most importantly, his daughter's position based on the sounds. The intruders were professionals, their movements coordinated, their communication minimal. This wasn't a random home invasion. These men had come for a specific purpose, and David had a sickening feeling he knew what it was. He had rejected multiple offers to sell his property over the past year, some more aggressive than others. But he never imagined they would go this far. In the kitchen, Sofia struggled silently as the men prepared to move her. The scarred man produced a small black backpack, removing what looked like a child's teddy bear. "Look," he said, holding it out to her. "A present. You like bears, yes?" Sofia didn't respond, her eyes fixed on her own teddy bear, still sitting on the kitchen counter, the one her mother had given her before she passed away. The man, with his hand over Sofia's mouth, slowly removed it, replacing it with a piece of tape. "Remember, quiet like a mouse," he warned, his accent thick. Sofia nodded again, tears streaming down her face. The third man gave a quick hand signal, all clear, and they began moving toward the side door, half carrying Sofia between them. David had to make a choice. He could engage them now, but with Sofia in their custody, any firefight would put her at risk. His daughter's safety had to come first. With agonizing restraint, he watched through the upstairs window as the men loaded his daughter into a waiting van. His trained eye caught everything: the vehicle's make and model, the partial plate number visible from his angle, and most importantly, the small distinctive marking on the van's side that identified it as belonging to Los Sombras Cartel. The van pulled away smoothly, professionally, leaving no trace of the violence that had just occurred, except for Sofia's scattered art supplies and her abandoned teddy bear. David's hands clenched into fists, his combat-honed mind already shifting into operational mode. He knew what would come next: a phone call, demands, threats. The cartel had just made the biggest mistake of their lives, but he couldn't afford to let anger cloud his judgment, not when Sofia's life was at stake. With mechanical precision, David moved to the gun safe, quickly entering the combination. Inside, beyond the visible compartment, a hidden section contained everything he'd hoped he'd never need again: weapons, tactical gear, and most importantly, a phone number he'd been given upon retirement. A number for when the unthinkable happened. As he gathered his equipment, David's features hardened into something Sofia would hardly recognize: the face of a Marine preparing for combat. The cartel had just declared war, not on a simple property owner, but on a man who had spent 20 years perfecting the art of urban warfare. They would soon learn the devastating consequences of their miscalculation. David's phone rang exactly 17 minutes after the van disappeared. He had already prepared himself for this moment, his mind shifting into the cold, calculated state that had kept him alive through countless combat situations. The number was blocked, but he knew who it would be. He answered on the third ring, his voice steady and controlled. "Mr. Martinez," a heavily accented voice began. "I trust by now you've noticed your daughter's absence." David's free hand clenched, but his voice remained eerily calm. "If you've hurt her—" The voice cut him off with a dark chuckle. "Sofia is perfectly safe for now. Her future well-being depends entirely on your cooperation." David stood at his kitchen window, his eyes fixed on the spot where the van had been. "Let me speak to her." There was a pause, followed by shuffling sounds. Then Sofia's trembling voice came through. "Daddy!" The single word carried all her fear and confusion, tearing at David's heart. "I'm scared." Before he could respond, the man's voice returned. "As you can hear, she's unharmed. Keep following our instructions and she'll stay that way." David's military training kicked in as he mentally recorded every detail, background noises, acoustic qualities of the space they were in, even the slight echo in the man's voice that suggested a large empty room. "What do you want?" David asked, though he already knew the answer. The response came quickly, confirming his suspicions. "Your property, Mr. Martinez. The documents will be prepared. You'll sign over everything to our holding company. Once the transfer is complete, you'll get your daughter back." David's mind was already racing through scenarios, mapping out possibilities. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" The man's response was cold and businesslike. "You don't. But you don't have a choice. We'll contact you in 1 hour with further instructions. No police, no FBI, or Sofia pays the price." The line went dead, and David immediately sprang into action. He moved through his house with practiced efficiency, gathering essential gear he'd hoped never to use again. From a hidden compartment in his closet, he retrieved a black duffel bag containing everything he'd need: tactical gear, weapons, and most importantly, a secure satellite phone. David punched in a number he'd memorized years ago, one given to him by his former commanding officer for emergencies only. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered, "Ghost Actual." David's response was immediate. "Sierra 77, authentication code, Echo Lima 923. There was a brief pause before the voice responded, all formality gone. "David, Jesus, it's been years." David cut straight to the point. "Jack, they took Sofia. Los Sombras. Cartel. I need everything you've got on their operations in Southern California, particularly around Pine Valley." Colonel Jack Reynolds, David's former CO and current head of a classified anti-cartel task force, didn't hesitate. "Already pulling it up. How long ago?" David checked his watch. 23 minutes. 3 men. Professional team, using a modified Ford Transit van, partial plate visible. "They're after my property. The distribution route," Jack said grimly. "We've been tracking their expansion plans. Your land would give them a perfect corridor." David could hear rapid typing in the background. "I'm sending you everything we have. But David, you need to know, Los Sombras isn't just any cartel. They're well-funded, well-trained, and absolutely ruthless." "I don't care what they are," David replied, his voice taking on an edge that would have made his enemies in combat tremble. "They took my daughter. That's all that matters." He could almost hear Jack nodding on the other end. "I'm sending coordinates to your secure device. We've identified several possible locations they might be using. But David, you can't go in alone. Let me dispatch a team." David was already checking his weapons, muscle memory taking over as he assembled and loaded each one. "No time, Jack. They'll be watching for any official response. I need to handle this my way." He paused, remembering Sofia's face. "But I could use some eyes in the sky." "Already on it," Jack replied. "I'm redirecting a surveillance drone to your area. Completely deniable, off the books. The feed will go directly to your tactical pad." David felt a small measure of relief. Having aerial surveillance would significantly improve his chances. As he geared up, David's mind shifted fully into combat mode. The concerned father was still there, driving him forward, but now the Marine was in control. The warrior who had earned his reputation in the world's most dangerous places. He checked his watch again. 31 minutes had passed since they took Sofia. "One more thing, Jack," David said as he finished his preparations. I need you to run interference if any local law enforcement gets involved. This needs to stay quiet. Jack's response was immediate. Consider it done. And David, make them regret ever touching your family. David ended the call and moved to Sofia's room. On her bed sat the photo album she loved so much, filled with pictures of happier times. Her mother, their family together, moments of peace he had fought so hard to protect. He picked up her favorite picture, taken just months before her mother's death, and tucked it into his tactical vest, close to his heart. The cartel had made a critical error. They saw him as just another retired Marine, someone who could be pressured and controlled. They didn't understand that they had awakened something far more dangerous, a father with nothing left to lose, and the skills to make them pay dearly for their mistake. David checked his watch one final time. The cartel would be calling again, in 22 minutes. By then, he would be ready to begin his hunt. David moved through the shadows of Pine Valley's industrial district, his movements precise and deliberate. The tactical pad in his hand displayed a satellite view of the area, with 3 potential locations highlighted in red, possible cartel strongholds identified by Jack's intelligence. The sun had fully set now, and the commercial area had emptied of legitimate business traffic, leaving only the occasional security guard to avoid. The first location was an abandoned textile factory on the outskirts. David approached it like a ghost, using the surrounding warehouses as cover. His combat gear, all matte black, made him nearly invisible in the darkness. The thermal imaging device he carried showed no significant heat signatures inside the building, no guards, no personnel, and most importantly, no sign of Sofia. "Location 1 is cold," David whispered into his secure comlink. Jack's voice crackled back. "Copy. That. Drone shows minimal activity at location 2, but heavy vehicle movement around location 3, the old Riverside storage complex." David's jaw tightened. The storage facility would be perfect for their operation. Multiple buildings, numerous access points, and plenty of places to hide a hostage. As he moved toward his next target, David's satellite phone vibrated. The cartel's second call was right on schedule. He answered, maintaining his steady pace through the shadows. "Mr. Martinez," the same voice from before spoke, "I trust you've had time to consider your situation carefully." "Where do you want to meet?" David asked, his voice betraying none of the fury burning inside him. The man on the phone seemed pleased with his apparent cooperation. "There's an industrial park off Highway 15. Come alone. Bring the signed property transfer documents we've sent to your email. You have 1 hour." David could hear something. In the background, the distant sound of machinery, perhaps a generator or industrial fan. He filed the information away. Another piece of the puzzle. "Let me speak to Sofia again." There was a pause. Then his daughter's voice came through, stronger this time, but still frightened. "Daddy, when can I come home?" The question nearly broke his composure, but David kept his voice steady. "Soon, princess. Very soon. Be brave for me, okay?" The man's voice returned before Sofia could respond. "1 hour, Mr. Martinez. Come alone, or you'll never see her again." The line went dead. David immediately contacted Jack. "Did you trace it?" Jack's response was quick. "Signal bounced through multiple towers, but we narrowed the origin to a 2-block radius around the Riverside complex. Drone shows increased activity there in the last 10 minutes. They're getting ready to move," David concluded, already adjusting his course. "They'll be expecting me to follow their instructions, show up at the meeting point desperate and compliant." Jack's concern was evident in his voice. "What's your play?" David checked his weapons as he moved, every motion automatic after years of combat experience. "They'll have a team at the meeting point, probably watching for any sign of law enforcement." or military involvement. Meanwhile, they'll try to move Sofia to a secondary location. His voice hardened, but they don't know we've located their base, and they don't know what's coming for them. The riverside storage complex loomed ahead, a sprawling maze of buildings and shipping containers. David's trained eye quickly identified the security measures: cameras, motion sensors, and armed guards patrolling in irregular patterns. Professional setup, but nothing he hadn't dealt with before in combat zones across the world. "I'm seeing 12 heat signatures on the drones." "Thermal imaging," Jack reported. "Main concentration in the central building, 2 rooftop sentries, and perimeter patrols." David processed the information as he established his observation position. "Any sign of Sofia?" "Small heat signature in what appears to be an interior room, central building, ground floor. Guard posted outside." The information confirmed David's suspicions. They were keeping her close, probably planning to move her just before the scheduled meeting. David began formulating his plan. The cartel would be expecting him to show up at their chosen location, giving them time to relocate Sofia. Instead, he would bring the fight to them on his terms. The complex's security was good, but he had overcome better in worse conditions, with less preparation. "Jack, I need a diversion," David whispered, studying the patrol patterns. "Something to draw their attention to the south side of the complex." He could almost hear Jack smiling. "I think I can arrange a few drunk teenagers making noise near their perimeter. Give me 5 minutes." David used the time to prepare. He removed several small devices from his tactical vest, specialized charges that would create confusion without risking structural damage. In his Marine days, they had called this type of operation a ghost insertion. Get in, complete the mission, and disappear before the enemy knew what hit them. The image of Sofia's frightened face flashed through his mind, strengthening his resolve. The cartel had chosen this confrontation, thinking they were dealing with a simple property owner who happened to be a retired Marine. They were about to learn the difference between a retired Marine and a Marine father fighting for his child. "Diversion team is in position," Jack's voice came through. "On your signal." David took one final look at the thermal imaging, confirming the guards' positions. His daughter was in there, scared but alive, waiting for her father to come save her. The cartel had no idea that their carefully planned operation was about to turn into their worst nightmare. "Execute," David commanded, and prepared to show Los Sombras exactly why you never threaten a Marine's family. The diversion worked perfectly as planned. The drunk teenagers, actually undercover operatives from Jack's team, created enough noise and chaos at the complex's southern perimeter to draw the attention of several guards. David watched through his tactical scope as the security pattern shifted, creating the opening he needed. The cartel's men were disciplined, but they were also predictable, responding exactly as their training dictated. Moving like a shadow, David approached the complex's northeastern corner, where the security cameras had the longest blind spot. The perimeter fence posed no challenge. He'd scaled worse under heavy fire in combat. Within seconds, he was inside the compound, pressing himself against the cold metal of a shipping container as a guard passed merely feet away. "2 tangos approaching from your 3 o'clock, Jack's voice whispered through his earpiece. David held his position, controlling his breathing as the guards walked past his position. They were speaking in rapid Spanish, their conversation providing valuable intelligence. "El Jefe wants the girl moved before the father shows up," one said, lighting a cigarette. "They're bringing the van around in 20 minutes. David's jaw clenched. 20 minutes. They were planning to transport Sofia before the scheduled meeting, just as he'd suspected. He couldn't let that happen. Moving her would only make rescue more difficult and dangerous. As soon as the guards passed, he moved deeper into the complex, staying in the shadows between the buildings. The central building loomed ahead, its windows dark except for a faint light on the ground floor. That's where they were holding Sofia. David placed his first charge on a generator near the western edge of the complex. When detonated, it would create a spectacular but harmless distraction. 3 more charges followed at strategic points, each designed to draw attention away from his planned entry point. 5 heat signatures in the main building, Jack updated him. 2 by the entrance, 1 with the girl, and 2 moving between. Rooms. Looks like they're preparing for transport. David acknowledged with a slight tap on his comm device. He was now close enough that speaking would risk detection. The next phase would require perfect timing. David reached for his detonator, waiting for the perimeter patrol to reach its furthest point from his position. The moment they turned the corner, he pressed the button. The first charge exploded in a brilliant flash of light and sound, immediately, followed by the others in sequence. Chaos erupted exactly as planned. Guards began shouting, running toward the explosions, their disciplined formations breaking down in the confusion. David was already moving, using the mayhem as cover to approach. The main building's side entrance. 2 guards remained at the door, their attention divided between their post and the commotion outside. David didn't hesitate. He emerged from the shadows like a wraith, taking down the first guard with a precise strike to the throat before the man could make a sound. The second guard managed to reach for his weapon, but David was faster. A quick, brutal sequence of movements left both men unconscious, their bodies hidden in the shadows. Multiple targets converging on the explosion sites, Jack reported, but you've got movement inside the building. They're preparing to move the girl. David slipped inside, his night vision giving him a clear view of the dimly lit interior. The building's layout was simple, a central hallway with rooms on either side. He could hear voices coming from one of the rooms ahead, including one that made his blood boil, the accented voice from the phone calls. "Get her ready," the voice commanded. "The father will be here soon, but we're not taking any chances. Move her to the secondary location now." David heard Sofia whimper, and something inside him snapped. The calculated marine precision merged with a father's rage, creating something truly lethal. Moving with controlled fury, David approached the room. His thermal imaging showed 3 men inside, with Sofia, plus 1 in the hallway. The guard in the hall never saw what hit him. David's garrote made sure of that. 1 less obstacle between him and his daughter. Inside the room, Miguel Ramirez was losing patience. "Hurry up!" he snapped at his men as they prepared to move. "Sofia, we need to—" He never finished the sentence. The lights suddenly went out, plunging the room into darkness. Before anyone could react, the door burst open. David moved like a force of nature, years of combat training combining with a father's desperate need to protect his child. The first man went down before he could raise his weapon, a precisely placed strike crushing his windpipe. The second managed to fire once, the muzzle flash illuminating the room for a split second, but the bullet found only empty air where David had been a moment before. Miguel reached for Sofia, attempting to use her as a shield, but he had underestimated both David's speed and his daughter's resolve. Sofia, seeing her father's shadow in the darkness, bit down hard on her captor's hand and dropped to the floor, exactly as David had taught her in their safety drills. The moment she was clear, David struck, his attacks flowing with lethal precision. The fight was over in seconds. When emergency lights flickered on, Miguel found himself on his knees, disarmed, staring up at the barrel of his own weapon. But it wasn't the gun that terrified him. It was the cold, deadly look in David Martinez's eyes. This wasn't the desperate father they'd expected to manipulate. This was something else entirely, a Marine who had found his target. Sofia ran into her father's arms, tears streaming down her face as David kept his weapon trained on Miguel. He held her close with one arm, his military training never allowing him to lose focus on the threat before him. "Did they hurt you, Princess?" he asked softly. Sofia shook her head, clinging to him tighter. "I was so scared, Daddy." Miguel remained on his knees, blood trickling from his split lip, his eyes darting between David and the door. The cartel commander's confident demeanor had crumbled, replaced by the dawning realization of his fatal miscalculation. "You don't understand what you're doing," Miguel said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Los Sombras will not stop. They will send others." David's response was cold and precise. "Good. Then they can join you in explaining how you lost an entire operation to one man." He pressed his comm device. "Jack, I have Sofia. How's our exit looking?" Static crackled before the response came. "Multiple tangos still focused on the diversion points, but you've got incoming from the north. 3, maybe 4 armed individuals." The sound of running footsteps in the hallway confirmed Jack's warning. David moved swiftly, securing Sofia behind a heavy metal desk before taking up a defensive position. "Stay down, Princess," he commanded. "Cover your ears." Sofia nodded, remembering their safety drills at home, and pressed her hands tightly over her ears. The first cartel member burst through the door, weapon raised, but David was faster. 2 precise shots dropped the man before he could fire. The second attacker managed to squeeze off a round, but his aim was spoiled by the darkness and confusion. David's return fire was devastatingly accurate. Miguel used the chaos to make his move, lunging for a hidden weapon in his ankle holster. David spotted the movement in his peripheral vision and reacted instantly. His boot connected with Miguel's jaw, sending the cartel commander sprawling. "Bad choice," David growled, following up with a strike that ensured Miguel wouldn't be getting up again. "Jack, we need an exit strategy," David communicated while maintaining his defensive position. "Main entrance is compromised. Too many hostiles regrouping." Jack's response was immediate. "Backloading dock. Drone shows it's clear for the moment. I've got a vehicle approaching your position from the east." David quickly assessed their situation. They needed to move fast before the remaining cartel members could organize a coordinated response. He turned to Sofia, who was watching him, with complete trust despite her fear. "Remember how we practiced running to safe places?" he asked. Sofia nodded bravely. "Just like hide and seek." "That's right, Princess. We're going to play that game now. Stay close to me, okay?" He lifted her into his arms, keeping his weapon ready in his free hand. Sofia wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. The weight of his daughter in one arm didn't slow David down. He'd trained for similar scenarios countless times in combat. They moved through the building's dark corridors with practiced efficiency. David's night vision gave them a crucial advantage, allowing him to navigate while the cartel members were still struggling with the darkness. The sound of confused shouts and sporadic gunfire echoed through the complex as the remaining hostiles tried to determine what was happening. "Incoming vehicle, eastern approach," Jack updated. "Black SUV, friendly. Driver is call sign Phantom. Remember him?" David allowed himself a slight smile. Jake Phantom Rodriguez had been his team's extraction specialist in the Marines. If anyone could get them out of this mess, it was him. They reached the loading dock just as gunfire erupted behind them. David returned fire one-handed, his shots forcing the pursuers to take cover. The black SUV appeared like a ghost, sliding to a stop with precision. The rear door opened, revealing Jake in full tactical gear. "Need a ride, Master Sergeant?" David passed Sofia to Jake, who quickly secured her in the back seat. "Keep your head down, sweetheart," Jake instructed as David provided covering fire. More cartel members were converging on their position, but their shots were wild, uncoordinated. Fear had replaced their earlier professional discipline. "Time to go, sir," Jake called out. David fired a final burst, dropping 2 more attackers before diving into the vehicle. Jake accelerated smoothly, his expert driving taking them away from the complex as bullets pinged harmlessly off the armored SUV's exterior. Sofia reached for her father's hand, and David held it tightly, relief flooding through him. "Package secured," David reported to Jack, "headed to Safe House Alpha." He could hear the satisfaction in Jack's voice. "Good work, Marine. I've got teams moving in to clean up the scene. Los Sombras is about to have a very bad night." As they sped through the darkness, David held his daughter close, his combat-hardened exterior softening slightly. They weren't completely safe yet. Los Sombras wouldn't take this defeat lightly. But for now, Sofia was back in his arms. And David had sent a clear message to anyone who might think of threatening his family in the future. The cartel had learned an expensive lesson: never underestimate a Marine father's love for his child. The armored SUV moved swiftly through the night, Jake's expert driving keeping them clear of any potential pursuit. In the back seat, Sofia remained curled against her father, her small hands still trembling slightly, but her grip fierce and determined. David kept one arm protectively around her, while maintaining visual awareness of their surroundings, his tactical mindset never fully disengaging. "Status update," Jack's voice crackled through the comm. "We've got multiple cartel vehicles mobilizing in your sector. They're implementing a search pattern." David exchanged glances with Jake through the rearview mirror. They both knew Los Sombras wouldn't give up easily, not after such a humiliating defeat. "Copy that," David responded quietly, careful not to alarm Sofia. "Switching to alternate route Beta." He turned to Jake. "Take the river road. We'll lose them in the industrial maze." Jake nodded, smoothly changing their course. The SUV's engine hummed as they accelerated through the empty streets, its dark exterior blending with the shadows. Sofia lifted her head slightly, her voice barely a whisper. "Are the bad men still following us, Daddy?" David stroked her hair gently, his combat-hardened features softening. "Don't worry, Princess. Uncle Jake is the best driver in the world, remember? No one can catch us." Jake smiled in the mirror, remembering countless combat extractions that had proven that statement true. 3 vehicles detected on parallel routes, Jack updated. "They're trying to box you in." David's mind raced through their options. The River Road was their best chance, a labyrinth of abandoned warehouses and construction sites that he and Jake had already scouted as potential evacuation routes. It was the kind of terrain that favored their training and experience. Jake turned. Off the main road, the SUV's sophisticated suspension handling the rough, industrial access road with ease. "Just like Damascus, eh, Master Sergeant?" he commented, referencing a particularly harrowing extraction years ago. David nodded grimly. "Let's hope this one ends better." Sofia looked between them curiously, momentarily distracted from her fear by their conversation. The first sign of pursuit came as they rounded a corner, headlights in their rearview mirror, moving fast. Jake accelerated, his movements precise, as he navigated the increasingly complex network of side roads and alleys. "2 more coming. In from the east," he reported calmly. "They're trying to force us toward the river." David reached into his tactical vest, retrieving several small devices. "Sofia, cover your ears again, sweetheart." She complied immediately, trusting her father completely. David lowered his window slightly, timing his movements carefully as they passed between 2 abandoned buildings. The first pursuit vehicle appeared behind them, closing the distance rapidly. David waited until it was in the perfect position, then dropped one of the devices. The flashbang eruption sent the cartel vehicle swerving violently, crashing into a stack of empty containers. Jake didn't even flinch, his focus absolute, as he executed a perfect defensive driving maneuver. "Contact, 10 o'clock, David warned, spotting another vehicle attempting to cut them off. Jake responded instantly, the SUV's tires squealing as they took a sharp turn down a narrow alley. The pursuing vehicle couldn't match their precision, scraping against the wall as it tried to follow. "The bridge is 2 minutes out," Jake announced, "but they'll be expecting that." David nodded, already formulating a plan. "Jack, we need eyes on the bridge approach. What's it look like?" There was a brief pause before Jack responded. "Two vehicles in position, likely armed. Bridge is your only water crossing for 5 miles in either direction." Sofia had uncovered her ears, her eyes wide as she watched her father work. Despite the danger, there was a sense of awe in her expression. She was seeing a side of her father she'd never known existed. David caught her gaze and gave her a reassuring wink. "Ready for a magic trick, princess? Watch this." He keyed his radio again. "Jack, remember that construction site we mapped? The one with the temporary bridge?" A chuckle came through the comm. "Already on it. Drone showing clear passage, but it'll be tight." Jake's eyes widened slightly. "The Bailey Bridge? Sir, that's barely wide enough for someone with your skills," David finished, "unless you're losing your touch." Jake's response was to accelerate, a determined grin spreading across his face. "Hold tight, little one," he called to Sofia. "Your dad and I are about to show you why we were the best extraction team in the Corps." They cut through another series of alleys, the pursuing vehicles falling behind as Jake's superior driving skills showed their worth. The temporary construction bridge appeared ahead, a narrow metal span intended for work vehicles, barely wide enough for their SUV. Most importantly, it was completely unexpected. "Approaching from the south," Jack reported. "Bridge is clear, but you've got about 2 minutes before they figure out what you're doing." Jake lined up their approach perfectly, his concentration absolute. Sofia grabbed her father's hand tightly as they accelerated toward the seemingly impossible crossing. The SUV hit the bridge at exactly the right speed and angle, its wheels finding just enough purchase on the metal surface. For a heart-stopping moment, they were suspended over the river, the bridge creaking under their weight. Then they were across, Jake immediately taking them into a concealed position among the construction equipment. Behind them, they could hear the frustrated shouts of their pursuers, realizing they'd been outmaneuvered. David held Sofia close, feeling her racing heart begin to slow. "See? Magic," he whispered. She managed a small smile, her fear finally starting to fade. "Package secure," David reported to Jack. "Moving to safe house now." They had escaped, the immediate threat, but David knew this wasn't over. Los Sombras would be desperate for revenge after tonight. But for now, his daughter was safe, and that was all that mattered. Jake guided the SUV toward their secure location, all of them knowing that the night's adventures were far from over. The cartel had just learned a painful lesson about underestimating a Marine father, but some lessons needed to be reinforced. The safe house was a nondescript ranch-style home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, its ordinary appearance masking its true nature. Jake pulled into the garage, the door closing automatically behind them. Inside, motion sensors and security cameras monitored every approach, while reinforced walls and bulletproof windows provided protection that rivaled many military installations. "Home sweet home," Jake commented as they exited the vehicle, his experienced eyes already scanning for any signs of compromise. David carried Sofia inside, her small form still clinging tightly to him. The interior was sparsely furnished, but comfortable, designed to serve as both a fortress and a temporary shelter. "All clear on perimeter scans," Jack's voice confirmed, through their comms. "No hostile movement within a 5-mile radius. Looks like they've lost your trail for now." David nodded, finally allowing himself to relax slightly. "Copy that. Initiating lockdown protocols." Sofia looked around the unfamiliar space with curiosity, her natural resilience beginning to show through the trauma of the night. "Is this another secret place like in your stories, Daddy?" she asked, remembering the tales he used to tell her of his military days, heavily edited versions, of course. "That's right, Princess," David replied, setting her down on a comfortable couch. "This is a special, safe place. No one can find us here." He knelt in front of her, his tactical gear contrasting sharply with his gentle demeanor. "Are you hungry? We've got your favorite snacks in the kitchen." Jake emerged from checking the house's security systems, his weapon finally holstered. "Perimeter is secure, all systems operational. We've got clear lines of sight in all directions, and the panic room is prepped if needed." He smiled at Sofia, trying to keep the mood light. "Hey kiddo, want to see something cool?" He pulled out a tablet, showing her the house's security. "Camera feeds. See, we can see everything around us. It's like having superpowers." Sofia's eyes widened with interest, momentarily distracted from the night's events. David used the opportunity to contact Jack again, moving slightly away to discuss their next steps. "Los Hombres will regroup," David said quietly. "Miguel's likely still alive and he won't take this humiliation well." Jack's response was grim. "Already seeing chatter, they're calling in reinforcements from their other operations. This just became personal for them." "Then we need to end it before they can reorganize," David replied, his voice hardening. "They need to understand that coming after my family was their last mistake." He could hear Jack typing rapidly. "I'm pulling up everything we have on their local infrastructure. But David, they're going to throw everything they have at you now." Jake joined the conversation, having settled Sofia with some snacks and a tablet loaded with her favorite games. "We've got maybe 12 hours before they're back to full operational strength. Less if they call in their heavy hitters from across the border." David watched his daughter, her small face illuminated by the tablet's screen. She was trying so hard to be brave, but he could see the lingering fear in her eyes. The cartel hadn't just attacked him, they had stolen his child's sense of security, her belief in the safety of her world. That was something he couldn't forgive. "Jack, what assets can you give us?" David asked, his mind already formulating plans. "Officially nothing," Jack replied. "This operation doesn't exist, but unofficially, I've got 3 teams of independent contractors who'd love to help teach Los Hombres a lesson about targeting families." "We'll need more than that," Jake interjected. "Their main compound will be heavily fortified, and they'll be expecting us now." David nodded in agreement. "We're not just hitting their compound, we're going to dismantle their entire operation in one night. Every safe house, every storage facility, every distribution point." Jack whistled low. "That's ambitious, even for you, David. You're talking about taking on one of the most powerful cartels in the region." David's response was cold and determined. "They started this when they took my daughter. I'm going to finish it." Sofia called out from the couch, her voice small but steady. "Daddy, can you come sit with me?" David's expression softened immediately. "Be right there, princess." He turned back to his conversation. "Jack, get everything ready. But first, I need a secure video call. There's someone Sofia needs to see." Minutes later, Sofia's face lit up as her aunt's image appeared on a secure tablet. "Aunt Sarah!" The woman on the screen, David's sister, smiled warmly. "Hey, sweetheart. Your daddy says you're having a sleepover at a special place." David had already briefed Sarah on the situation. She was former military intelligence herself and understood the need for discretion. As Sofia chatted with her aunt, David, Jake, and Jack continued planning their response. The cartel had resources, numbers, and firepower on their side, but they had something more valuable: decades of combined special operations experience and the righteous fury of a father protecting his child. "Get some rest," David told Sofia after she finished her call. "Tomorrow's going to be a busy day." She looked up at him trustingly. "Are we going home tomorrow?" David stroked her hair gently. "Soon, princess. But first, Daddy and Uncle Jake have to make sure the bad men can't ever bother us again." Sofia nodded solemnly, understanding more than a child her age should have to. As she drifted off to sleep, David turned back to his preparations. Los Hombres had no idea what they had unleashed. By targeting his family, they had signed their own destruction warrant. The night wasn't over, it was just beginning. Under the safe house's secure lighting, David, Jake, and their newly arrived team spread out tactical maps across the kitchen table. Sofia slept peacefully in the next room, monitored by both security cameras, and Sarah, who had arrived an hour earlier to provide additional protection and familiar comfort for her niece. Los Sombras has 3 main operational hubs in the region. Jack's voice explained through the secure video feed displayed on a laptop. The warehouse complex you hit earlier was just a forward operating base. Their real infrastructure is more substantial. The screen showed thermal imaging of several locations, each marked with detailed intelligence annotations. David studied the data with practiced intensity, his mind processing every detail. Their main compound will be the hardest target, he noted, pointing to the largest facility. But it's also where Miguel will be holed up, nursing his wounds and his ego. Jake nodded in agreement, remembering the cartel commander's humiliation. Our intel suggests they're consolidating their forces, one of the newly arrived operators, Collins, reported. He was former Delta Force, someone who had worked with David in particularly nasty operations years ago. They're pulling in every available asset within a 100-mile radius. Good, David replied, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Let them gather. Makes our job easier. He turned to the assembled team, 6 operators, each chosen for their specific skills and their history of working in the shadows. This isn't just about sending a message anymore. We're going to dismantle their entire operation. The plan took shape quickly, each operator contributing their expertise. They would strike simultaneously at multiple locations, using Los Sombras' own aggressive consolidation against them. The cartel's attempt to gather strength would instead make them vulnerable to a coordinated attack. Primary target is their main compound, David explained, marking positions on the map. That's where their leadership will be, along with their primary documentation and financial records. Jack's team will handle the electronic warfare, shutting down their communications and security systems. Jake pointed to several smaller locations. Secondary targets are their distribution centers. We hit these simultaneously, cutting off their ability to move product or resources. The other operators nodded, already mentally preparing for their roles. What about civilian casualties? Sarah asked from the doorway, her military intelligence background evident in her precise questions. Los Sombras likes to position their operations near populated areas as insurance. David had already considered this. That's why timing is crucial. We strike at 300. Minimal civilian presence, maximum disorientation for their guards. The team spent the next hour refining the plan, accounting for every contingency. David's experience showed in every detail. He had learned the hard way that in operations like this, preparation meant the difference between success and disaster. But there was something else driving his precision now, something personal. During a brief break, David checked on Sofia. She had kicked off her blanket in her sleep, and he gently tucked it back around her. The sight of his daughter, finally resting peacefully after her ordeal, strengthened his resolve. Los Sombras hadn't just made a tactical error by targeting her. They had awakened something they couldn't possibly understand. All teams are in position, Jack reported as dawn approached. Surveillance confirms increased activity at all target locations. They're planning something big. David wasn't surprised. The cartel's pride had been wounded. They would be desperate to re-establish their dominance. Perfect timing, David replied, checking his weapons one final time. They'll be focused on their revenge plans, not expecting us to strike first. He turned to his team, seeing the same controlled intensity in their eyes that he felt in his core. Gear up. We move in 30 minutes. Sarah approached her brother as the others prepared. Sofia will be safe here, she assured him. I've got 3 layers of security and a direct line to emergency response teams. David nodded, grateful for his sister's presence. "If anything happens—" "It won't," Sarah interrupted firmly. "Go do what you need to do. Make sure these people never threaten our family again." Her expression softened slightly. "Just make sure you come back. That little girl needs her father." David touched the photo of Sofia he carried in his tactical vest, right over his heart. "Count on it." He moved to say goodbye to his daughter, finding her awake and watching him with those trusting eyes that meant everything to him. "Are you going to stop the bad men, Daddy?" she asked quietly. David knelt beside her, his combat gear a stark contrast to the gentle way he stroked her hair. "Yes, Princess, they'll never bother us again after tonight." Sofia reached up and hugged him tightly. "Promise you'll come back?" "I promise," David replied, holding her close for a moment. "Be good for Aunt Sarah. I'll be home before you know it." As he stood to leave, Sofia called out one more time, "Daddy, show them why you're a Marine." David smiled, his daughter's words filling him with fierce pride. "Yes, Mom." He joined his team in the garage, where they were doing final equipment. Checks. The night ahead would be long and violent, but necessary. Los Sombras had brought this on themselves the moment they decided to target an innocent child. They were about to learn why certain lines should never be crossed, especially when dealing with a Marine father. The night air hummed with tension as David's team approached Los Sombras' main compound. Through their night vision goggles, the facility's security measures were clearly visible. Armed guards, motion sensors, and surveillance cameras creating a web of protection that would have deterred most attackers. But tonight's operators weren't most attackers. "Alpha team in position," Jake's voice whispered through the secure comm. He and two other operators had circled to the compound's eastern approach, ready to create a diversion that would draw attention. From David's main assault, similar confirmations came from the teams targeting Los Sombras' secondary locations. "Stand by for system breach," Jack announced from his command center. "On my mark, you'll have exactly 47 seconds before the backup generators kick in." David checked his watch, synchronizing with the other teams. Everything had to be perfectly coordinated for the plan to work. Through his scope, David could see increased activity inside the compound. Los Sombras was definitely planning something big. Vehicles were being prepped, weapons distributed, and orders given with urgent intensity. Miguel's wounded pride had pushed them into exactly the position David had anticipated. "Breach in 3, 2, 1, mark." The compound plunged into darkness as Jack's cyber attack knocked out their primary power. Immediately, David's team moved forward, their training evident in every silent step. The guard towers, momentarily blind without their spotlights, never saw them coming. David took out the first two guards with suppressed shots before they could raise an alarm. Beside him, Collins handled the perimeter sensors, using specialized equipment to create a corridor through their security net. They had trained for operations like this countless times, but tonight there was an added intensity to their movements. "East side engaged," Jake reported, the sound of controlled gunfire punctuating his words. His team had drawn the compound's defensive response exactly as planned, creating the opening David's strike team needed. They breached the outer wall precisely as the backup generators hummed to life. Inside the compound, chaos erupted as Los Sombras' forces tried to respond to multiple threats simultaneously. David's team moved like ghosts through the confusion, their attacks precise and devastating. Years of combat experience showed in every movement, every shot, every tactical decision. "Target building in sight," David communicated as they approached. The main structure. "Collins, prep the door." The former Delta operator moved forward with shaped charges, his movements quick and efficient. But before he could place them, the door burst open from the inside. Cartel gunmen poured out, their weapons blazing with more desperation than accuracy. David's team responded with the disciplined fire of veteran operators, dropping targets with mechanical precision. But the resistance was fiercer than expected. Miguel had clearly called in his elite guards. "Jack, we need that second blackout now," David ordered, as they took cover behind concrete barriers. The response was immediate. The backup generators failed, plunging the compound back into darkness. Under cover of night vision, David's team pressed their advantage. They fought their way through the building's ground floor, encountering pockets of resistance that grew increasingly desperate. The cartel's men were professional, but they were facing operators who had honed their skills in the world's worst combat zones. It wasn't a fair fight. David's instincts screamed a warning. Just as they reached the central stairwell, he pulled Collins back just as automatic fire ripped through the space they'd been standing. Above them, Miguel's voice rang out in accented English. "Martinez, you should have taken the deal. Now you'll watch everything you love burn." The threat ignited something primal in David's chest. This man had dared to kidnap his daughter, to threaten his family. The Marine's calculated precision merged with a father's rage. "Stack up," he ordered his team. "We end this now." They ascended the stairs in a coordinated assault, multiple flashbangs preceding their advance. The cartel's defensive positions were good, but they weren't prepared for the sheer intensity of the attack. David moved like a force of nature, each shot and strike carrying the weight of his promise to Sofia. Miguel's guards fell one by one, their training inadequate against operators of this caliber. The cartel commander retreated to his office, surrounded by his last remaining elite guards. But David's team had prepared for this. Shaped charges breached the reinforced doors from multiple angles. In the chaos that followed, David caught sight of Miguel, attempting to access a hidden escape route. Not this time. The Marine closed the distance with lethal intent, his movements fueled by memories of Sofia's terrified face. The fight was brutal but brief. Miguel's combat skills were no match for a father protecting his child. As David secured the cartel commander, the rest of his team completed their sweep of the building. Similar reports of success came in from the other strike teams. Los Sombras' entire local infrastructure was being dismantled simultaneously, their leadership captured or eliminated, their operations in shambles. "Compound secured," David reported, watching as Collins began gathering intelligence from Miguel's computers. "All primary targets neutralized." Jack's response carried satisfaction. Secondary teams reporting mission success across all locations. Los Sombras has been effectively erased from this region. David looked down at Miguel, who knelt before him in defeat. "You should have learned," the Marine said quietly. "Some lines you don't cross." The cartel commander's only response was a look of dawning comprehension. He finally understood just how badly he had miscalculated. The night's operation was a complete success, but David's thoughts were already turning homeward. He had a promise to keep to a little girl who believed her father could make the monsters go away, and tonight he had done exactly that. As dawn broke over Pine Valley, David Martinez drove down familiar streets that somehow looked different now. The morning sun cast a gentle glow over the neighborhood where families were just beginning to wake, unaware of the night's events. In the passenger seat, Sofia had finally dozed off, exhausted but safe. Her small hand still gripped her father's sleeve, as if making sure he wouldn't disappear again. The operation had been a complete success. Los Sombras' entire regional infrastructure had been dismantled in a single night. Miguel and his key lieutenants were in custody, their organization in ruins. Jack's teams were handling the cleanup, ensuring that no trace of the cartel's presence would remain to threaten David's family or anyone else's. "All clear at the house," Sarah's voice came through his earpiece one last time. "Security systems show no activity all night." She had already swept the property thoroughly, ensuring it was safe for their return. David smiled softly, grateful for his sister's expertise and protection. She had kept Sofia safe while he did what needed to be done. As they pulled into their driveway, David noticed small details with renewed appreciation. Sofia's bicycle leaning against the garage, her chalk drawings on the sidewalk, the wind chimes she had helped him hang last summer. These simple things represented everything he had fought to protect, everything the cartel had threatened to take away. "Princess," he said gently, touching Sofia's shoulder. "We're home." She stirred, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment, fear flickered across her face, a reminder of her ordeal, but it faded as she recognized their surroundings. "Really home?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. "Really home," David confirmed, helping her out of the car. "And the bad men are gone. They'll never bother us again." Sofia looked up at their house, then back at her father, processing everything that had happened. With the resilience of childhood, she seemed to accept this new reality, where her daddy could make monsters disappear. Inside, everything was exactly as they had left it. Sofia's art project still lay scattered on the kitchen table, a poignant reminder of how quickly their world had been turned upside down. But now those same colored papers and glitter seemed to represent something more, the return to normalcy, the restoration of peace. "Hungry, Princess?" David asked, already, moving to prepare her favorite breakfast. Sofia nodded, climbing onto her usual chair. As he cooked, David watched her from the corner of his eye, noting how she seemed to relax more with each passing minute. Children were remarkably adaptable, but he knew they would need time to process everything. Sarah arrived shortly after, bringing fresh groceries and a warmth that helped make the house feel like home again. "There's my brave girl," she said, hugging Sofia tightly. The little girl hugged back, then pulled away with sudden excitement. "Aunt Sarah, did you see? Daddy was like a superhero." David and Sarah exchanged glances over Sofia's head, a silent acknowledgement of how they would need to help her understand these events in an age-appropriate way. But for now, perhaps seeing her father as a superhero wasn't such a bad thing. It was certainly better than the fear she had experienced. As they ate breakfast together, Jack called one final time. "Cleanup is complete," he reported. "No trace of Los Sombras remains in the region. Our intelligence suggests their leadership in Mexico is cutting their losses. They won't risk another operation anywhere near you." David thanked him quietly, conscious of Sofia watching him with curious eyes. Later that morning, as Sarah helped Sofia unpack her backpack from the safe house, David stood at his office window. The purple heart on the wall caught his attention again, but now it seemed to represent something different, not just his service to his country, but his ongoing commitment to protect what mattered most. "Daddy?" Sofia's voice drew his attention. She stood in the doorway, holding her teddy bear, the one the cartel had left behind during the kidnapping. "Can we get a new bear? I don't like this one anymore." David knelt down to her level, understanding the deeper meaning in her request. It was her way of leaving the trauma behind. "Of course we can, Princess. We'll go pick one out together." He hugged her close, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck. "And maybe we can take some special classes too, learn some new safety games." Sofia nodded against his shoulder, showing a wisdom beyond her years. Sarah watched from the hallway, smiling softly at the scene. The road ahead would have its challenges. There would be nightmares to soothe, fears to overcome, and trust to rebuild. But they would face it together, as a family strengthened by adversity rather than broken by it. David Martinez had always been proud of his service as a Marine, but never more so than in these moments after returning home to his daughter. He had fought many battles in his military career, but none had been more important than this one. The fight to protect his child, to preserve her innocence and security. As the morning progressed, life began to return to normal in the Martinez household. Sofia returned to her art projects, though now she drew pictures of her daddy in his superhero outfit. David kept a watchful eye on her while maintaining His new security protocols, finding a balance between protection and allowing her to be a child. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting warm light through the windows of their home. In the peaceful quiet of this ordinary morning, David realized that sometimes the greatest victories aren't won on battlefields or in dramatic confrontations, but in moments like these, watching his daughter smile again, knowing she was safe, and understanding that he would always be there to protect her. Los Sombras had made a fatal mistake in targeting Sofia Martinez. They had assumed her father was just another retired Marine. Instead, they had learned the most dangerous force in the world isn't found in weapons or tactics, but in the love of a father for his child. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.